time to rock. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to you, everyone. Uh, we welcome to the Fellowship League, and I hope you guys are safe in this COVID-19 situation wherever you are around the world. And for those who don't know me, my name is Carl Abad. I am an active member of our church in CCF, which stands for Christ Commission Fellowship, headed by Pastor Peter Tanchi. And in particular, I'm also a active member of the youth movement there, which is called Elevate, headed by Pastor Marty Okaya. And I've served in Elevate as a Elevate speaker, facilitator, and discipleship leader. And it's been a great blessing to have to be part of that youth movement. Now we are continuing our series in life applications, and here with me right now is our wonderful guest, Sir Max Jeganathan. How are you doing over there, Sir Max?
Hey Carl, it's great to be with you. Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm here in Singapore, coming to you from my balcony. We are in lockdown in Singapore too, but today actually is the first day that the restrictions have been taken off. So we're starting to ease back into normal life, but it's great to be with you today.
Wow, and it's good to see you. I know, still working, still standing, and I've heard that you are a regional director of RZIM Asia Pacific, and it's a tough job in that case. So it's okay if you share, Sir Max, a little bit about yourself, so that for our dear viewers to know what's the status of RZIM lately, and like what's your profession, sir, and what have you been doing lately?
Sure. Well, I actually started life in Australia. I spent most of my life in Australia, and I worked as a lawyer and a political advisor there. And then it wasn't until about 8 years ago that, sorry, not even 8 years ago, 6 years ago, that I went to Oxford in the UK and did my postgraduate study there. And that's when I first got connected with Ravi Zacharias and his speaking team. And I was invited to join that speaking team in 2016. And then invited a year later to move to Singapore with my wife, Fiona. And so we have been in Singapore since the end of 2017. And a year after that, I was invited to step into this role as regional director for RZIM Asia Pacific. And so what I do is I oversee and work with a team of speakers and executive and administrative support people on our team across the Asia Pacific. So across India, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and a number of other countries. And we seek to come alongside people and help them with their questions about the Christian message, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, whether you're seeking, whether you're a skeptic, no matter who you are. We, quite simply, as many people know, RZIM's global mission is to help the believer think and help the thinker believe. And so I get the privilege of working with a great team here across the Asia Pacific in seeking to do that to people across our region.
Yes, and for the viewers, I've seen Sir Max over here back in Singapore of last year. I attended the wonderful training program there, which is called EAP, which stands for Emerging Apologist Program. And we had these special activities, group breakouts, and Sir Max here was our group facilitator, and it was an honor to have him as our facilitator. And Sir, I mean, it's wonderful to I got to see you back in Singapore, sir, last year.
It's great to connect again with you, Carl, and I'm so glad to hear of what you're doing with the Fellowship League and the initiative that you and your friends have taken. The Emerging Apologist program that we had in Singapore, we try to do that every year. Sadly, this year, because of the pandemic, we probably will have to reschedule that, but we'll be back next year in full-blooded activity, and we'll be doing that, and along with all of our other training programs and equipping programs, and both evangelistic and equipping programs that we run across the Asia Pacific and globally. So we look forward to seeing you at something else soon down the track.
Yes, sir. I hope to see us. I hope to see you as well in this coming rescheduling of that special wonderful event. And we'll be praying for you also, sir, on your ministry, on your
thank you,
on your amazing journey so far. And this is a really great privilege actually to interview one of those highest positions in in RZIM. This is actually unexpected, but this is a great opportunity. So shall we dive in now to our questions?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, so once again, a reminder: we're in the series of life applications. So hopefully this will not be too deep for you all. So our first question here, Sir Max, is we know that we're living in a time of crisis. and not only health crisis but also economic crisis. Like we are now in this recession age, and many people are worried about what's gonna happen in the future. Like the future is so uncertain. So the question here is, uh, how can we find meaning in God? Where is God in this time of crisis? And how can we find God in this situation?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Carl. And I think it's probably the most important and relevant question for all people, no matter what age we are at the moment. There is just so much uncertainty around. And it's not just the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of that. But I think this yearning for meaning and yearning for significance and ultimately yearning and reaching for God is something that is on every human heart in one way or another. It just manifests itself in different ways. And one thing this pandemic has done is it's just made that yearning all the more obvious. And I think the way that it has done that primarily is by attacking this myth that we have built up for ourselves about independence. Now, independence historically has always been a very positive thing. And I think in and of itself, it's not a bad thing, but historically it's been something that's been admired, it's been revered, it's been something that we always strive for. And it's been correlated very strongly with notions of strength and resilience and self-sufficiency. And we all want to be independent. We want to raise kids that are independent. We want to be emotionally independent, financially independent, physically independent. But when a pandemic like this comes along, it actually shows us what has always been the case, which is that independence is a bit of a myth in a practical and philosophical sense. It's been shown to be a myth practically because all of the institutions on which we build our independence have all come crumbling down. Our financial system, our economic system, our geographic systems of freedom and people movement and international travel and so forth, they've all come crashing down. So these methods and channels for independence have all ground to a halt. And so anyone that has been building their identity on independence is now in big trouble. And what this last few months has shown us is that we are all dependent on something. The only question is, what are we dependent on? And we see that philosophically as well as practically. For example, someone might tell me that they are financially independent. Well, that's all well and good, but if you're building your identity on that, then all you have become is you've become dependent on the concept of financial independence. If you think you're emotionally independent, you've just become dependent on the concept or the ideal of emotional independence. So one way or another, philosophically or practically, we are all infinitely dependent beings. We're all dependent on something. And so I think that's probably the best way to think about God in the context of the instability that we're currently seeing, is that he is dependable. We have all tried to depend on different things, and many of us have tried and succeeded at times. Many of us have tried and failed at times. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what we try. If we try and find fulfillment, if we try and find meaning, if we try and find stability in our own strength, we will always end up struggling because the objects of our dependence will let us down. Whether it's wealth or whether it's professional success or popularity or Facebook followers or Instagram likes or sex or drugs or alcohol or pleasure, whatever it might be, they will always let us down. And it's only God himself who provides that sure foundation of dependence that we can anchor our identity in. And so the second part of your question, well, how do we do that? How do we find him? I think is a wonderful question and a wonderfully practical question. And the way to do that is simply to investigate who he is, to reach out to him. This God is not a propositional God. He's not a God that you first need to learn a lot about. He's a relational God. Of course, it helps to learn about him, but he actually wants us to get to know him personally. And the best way to do that is to open up his word, to open up the Bible and start reading about God in his most relatable form. And his most relatable form is in the person of Jesus. And so for people who are interested or want to investigate or are curious, I really recommend two things. First is to reach out to people in your life who know Jesus and ask them about him. Ask them about their experience with him and their relationship with him. And secondly, and equally importantly, to open the Bible and actually read 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of the biographical accounts that we have of Jesus's life. And I really recommend just reading through, if you haven't even started yet, the biography written by John. It's the 4th one in the Bible. And, it's carbon datable, it's historically verifiable, it's legitimate, it's evidence-based, it's based on eyewitness testimony. And it's a wonderful depiction of the person of Jesus through which you can get to know him. But ultimately, God is a person to whom we can be in relationship. He's not just an abstract theory or philosophy. So yeah, I really encourage people to turn to him now to do that investigating. If he's been on your mind for a while, or if you maybe grew up Christian and now you've drifted away, now's a great time to reconnect.
Oh, amen, Sir Max. And truly, we are human beings who are finite, and we rely on someone out there who is
Mm,
the one, who is the
right,
eternal. Because
right.
we seek dependability from somewhere and from something, and the mistake there of human beings, of us, we human beings, is we seek pleasure and fulfillment in this world, but actually we don't realize there is someone out there. But sir,
Right.
what about the emotional side of the people? Because we all know that we cannot avoid emotions. We cannot avoid like this gravity of temptations and struggles and trials of life pulling us down to our knees. Like for
Mm,
example, of the emotional struggles of loneliness, the emotional struggles of despair, and even suicide. And I've heard lately, the famous Christian uh, rock singer. I believe it was Hawk Nelson. He
mm.
it's like he gave up the faith, and he and many pastors lately in recent years have committed suicide as well. So, what are your advices, sir, to those people who feel so lonely and so hopeless and suicidal?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I can fully understand and I can fully empathize with people who feel like that. You know, I think if we are honest, we all go through times in our life that are like that. We all go through events in our life that cause us to feel like that, and some of us go through it for a very long time, for years and years and years, for decades even. It might actually become so common that it just becomes a state of being and how we are. And I mean, the first thing to say, there's a few important points to make on this, Carl, because so many people are struggling with these issues. So I'm glad you asked the question. The first thing to say is that in a world that is so grounded in feelings and is so driven by feelings, I mean, the definition of a post-truth culture is a culture that thinks with its feelings. It's important not to get confused between feelings and reality. So our feelings are important, our emotions are important. They're necessarily and inextricably part of who we are, and they reflect how we are experiencing reality and how we are experiencing life. But they're not necessarily constitutive or indicative of that reality. And so we have to be careful not to believe everything that we feel, if you like. I saw once a quote that said, "Don't believe everything you think." I think that's absolutely right. But equally important is don't believe everything you feel. Just because you feel cold, it doesn't mean that you are cold. Just because you feel sad or you feel depressed, it doesn't mean that your existence is worthy of depression or worthy of sadness. There's nothing wrong with accepting feelings, and there's no need to try and just grit our teeth and try and be happy even when things are clearly difficult. But the first thing we have to remember is there's no necessary link between our feelings and reality. There's necessarily something to deal with, but there's no necessary link between our feelings and reality. So we do need to separate what our feelings from what reality actually is, even though there may be some indication or some reflection. The second thing to remember is that people who are walking with Jesus are just as susceptible to human brokenness, whether that be physical brokenness, emotional brokenness, social, sexual, mental brokenness. When we come to know Jesus, it's relational and it's amazing and it's transformative, and it puts us in this incredible relationship with God through which we are liberated from brokenness and guilt and shame and all of these things. But the imperfections that are built into the world and the imperfections that are built into human ontology, they stay exactly as they are in many, many ways. So, you know, if, you know, I'm about 5'6". I wish I was 6'5", but I'm 5'6". When I came to know Jesus, I didn't suddenly become 6'5" straight away. My body pretty much stayed the way it is, and you know, my hairline is going backwards. And that's not change. That's not changing as I walk with Jesus. So I'm still subject to aging. I'm still subject to time. I'm still subject to all of that. And a lot of mental ill health and emotional difficulties uh, are simply biochemical or anatomical outworkings of the brokenness of humankind, just like a broken arm would be, or cancer, or, you know, any other kind of conditions, medical conditions that people have. So the first thing that I would say, whether you're Christian or not, if you're struggling with something like this, the first and most important thing to do is to reach out for help, is to make sure you reach out for help. You're not on any measure required or expected to go through this on your own. And in fact, humankind, if the Christian message is true, one thing at the core of the Christian message is that we are all fundamentally relational, whether you're Christian or not. We're all deeply, deeply relational. And so life is simply not designed to be lived alone. And certainly mental ill health and emotional struggles are not designed to be experienced alone. So reach out for help. Remember that if it is actually clinical, if it is medical what you're going through, there might be a biochemical need, there might be a congenital issue. If that's the case, then medical help might actually assist you. I'm a Christian, and I deeply believe that God gave us medicine. He often blesses and heals through the medical professions and through medical specialists. So reach out for the help that you're looking for. And that's why you see sometimes people who are walking with Jesus, who do struggle with depression, who do sadly decide to take their own lives, because they're not immune to that. In the same way that Christians break their arms and catch colds and find themselves in car accidents and find themselves contracting COVID-19, you'd find Christians with emotional struggles and mental ill health episodes. So the first thing is not to be embarrassed about it, and the second thing is to reach out for help. And then thirdly is to remember that in the person of Jesus and in that relationship with God that we have, there's so much of emotional anxiety that does necessarily get made more endurable. It's not that he necessarily just takes it away or makes us immune to it, but he holds our hand and he helps us to walk through the suffering. And that's the difference with Jesus as compared with any other worldview. He doesn't tell us that our struggles mentally and emotionally are an illusion, or that we can self-medicate, or that we can just ignore them, or just we can think ourselves out of them, or pretend that some positive thinking might fix it. He says, no, there's genuine physical and internal brokenness in this world. And the only way through is to take the hand of Jesus and walk through that suffering. And I think that's a powerful thing, that this God, he helps us conquer our suffering, emotional, mental, or otherwise. He helps us conquer it by going through it, not by ignoring it.
Amen, amen. And truly, wow, those were powerful words, especially with the idea that there's no link between feeling and reality. It simply shows that we have to be vulnerable, we have to be humble, that we lack something. That's why we have to look at Jesus and look at his example and see how did he reach out to the brokenhearted. That's why it's an amazing link there in scriptures. Now, from the emotional side, Sir Max, we should have moved now like to the a little bit of the economic side. And forgive me if I in the previous questions it was so general. Like I put
Sure,
the
no problem.
economic status. I put it there, but maybe in the sense of like people so worried about earnings, so worried about money nowadays. People have to work because if there's no work, there's no pay. And along the way, people are having this issue that we have to go back to work and work and work and work again. And then, what if there's no pay? What if we have
Yeah.
a huge rise of unemployment lately? Again, we have the recession and the depression, especially in America. I mean, a lot of this worries going on when it comes to material gain and wealth.
Yeah.
So I'm just want to know, sir, what since you have like a background on economics and you have experience talking to different business meetings and banking meetings as well with different bankers, what can you say is the advice for those people who are working in the business sector or in the economic generally? What is your advice for them, sir, to
Yeah,
handle that?
it's particularly relevant at the moment, that question, Carl, because there's so much job insecurity. So many people have lost their jobs. Even the people that have their jobs still are worried. There are about to be enormous write-downs of profits that have already started. There's going to be a global recession, pretty obviously. The only question is how long is it going to go for, and which countries are going to actually not just go into recession, but go into depression. So the material concerns of people are valid, and they're not to be waved away. And I think it takes a pretty stupid and inconsiderate pastor or Christian leader to say money doesn't really matter, just focus on God. That's a ridiculous thing to say, and it's pretty unbiblical too. I think there are two broad categories of points to make, and I'll just make the 2 points that kind of headline each of those categories. The first is that we are responsible for our well-being. To the extent that we are capable, we are responsible for providing for ourselves. The work ethic that is really foundational to the biblical model of economics and free markets is pretty clear that, no one owes you anything. It's up to us to work, to study, to apply ourselves, and to make a living, whether that's sweeping streets or picking up garbage or cleaning toilets or practicing medicine or whatever it is. We are called to look at what we are gifted in terms of capacity and ability, and then we're called to look at what is available for us to do and to get out there and do it. And so we should continue to do that. And for people who want to provide for their families and who are concerned about that, those are very valid and worthy concerns. And they are concerns that flow out of a very biblical responsibility that every human being has, to the extent that we are capable of it. So that's the first point. The second point, which balances the first point out, is just to be clear that the God that we worship as followers of Jesus, and if you don't worship him, then I encourage you to investigate that, because this second point doesn't apply until you do. The God that we worship provides us with everything that we need existentially and experientially and in the context of our identity. And so we never have to worry or stress about the provision that we require in a material sense, because God always will provide for us. And he also redefines what success actually looks like. So if you're walking with Jesus, the Christian message tells us very clearly that success has nothing to do with money. Success is about the quality of our relationship with God, primarily, and secondarily, the quality of our relationships with the people around us. That's the only way to define success. It's our faithfulness to God and our relationship with him, and the way in which and the extent to which we love and pour out the love of God on the people around us. And so nowhere do we find financial success or even financial security in that measure. So we can rest assured that our success, our identity, our fulfillment has nothing to do with money. But similarly, at the same time, looking back at the first point, we still have to understand that, yes, we do have a responsibility to provide. And so we should pray for God's help in providing for us, for God's help in providing opportunities and providing the means through which we can then provide for ourselves. But then we need to actually get up and get off our backsides and go and work and follow those opportunities and look for them. So there is always a balance between God's sovereignty and human responsibility, and we have to take both of those very seriously. As soon as we compromise on either of those, we are being unbiblical, because the Bible is very, very clear that it repeatedly, it declares both of these truths. In Colossians 3, whatever you do, do it as if you are doing it for the Lord. We are called in Isaiah 58, in the book of Amos, in Matthew chapters 5 through 7, to work hard so we can then provide for people who can't provide for themselves, provide for people who are oppressed or who are struggling or who need that kind of material provision. But then at the same time, we're told not to worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take care of itself, but just to focus on today. We're told that God knows how many hairs there are on our heads, that he knows he knows the things that we need. He knows that we need clothes. He knows that we need food. He knows that we need shelter. So we're not supposed to worry about these things in an existential sense. We're supposed to give all of our needs to God, and then to go out and work hard to provide for ourselves and to provide for others, in the confidence that, having prayed for it, God will provide the opportunities through which we, alongside him, can provide for our needs.
Nice. And sir, I recall, because I watched one of your videos also in YouTube, and you were I'm not sure when was that. I think that was 2017 or 16. Right. You were discussing in a meeting, and I heard you mention, just for a little bit of historical sense there, you were discussing about Adam Smith, and right, and then Adam Smith somehow wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations.
Yes.
And then, but before he wrote that book, he wrote a book on the moral sentiments, if I'm right. The theory of moral sentiments, right? The theory of moral sentiments.
Right.
I mean, what struck me there, sir, is before he wrote about the Wealth of Nations, focusing more on the object of economies, the object components of the economy. He also wrote about morality of there. I mean, it's okay, sir. Like just for in a nutshell or for a short time, can you explain a little bit of that as well? Because that's very interesting. Not only to me, maybe it's also for different people who are in need of that fact as well.
Yeah. It's I mean, Adam Smith is not necessarily the first, and certainly not the only person to identify the fundamentals of what we now know as free market economics. But he definitely wrote a seminal piece, The Wealth of Nations, which really outlined the building blocks of capitalism as we know it today, the principles of supply and demand, how, free markets are the best way to optimize the most efficient allocation of resources to generate the maximum amount of wealth for people, through which we could then obviously lift the quality of life of people in the best way possible, in a collective and an individual sense. So he wrote that, and it's really that model of free market thinking that drives a lot of the market economies around today. So that idea of how we make money and how we used capital has driven, what we know to be modern capitalism. But you're absolutely right that around the time that he wrote The Wealth of Nations, he also wrote another equally important piece, if not a more important piece, that has been largely forgotten, which is called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And that's where Adam Smith, as a Christian, was very clear that these theories, these economic models, these structures of understanding currency and trade and commerce, they need to be accompanied by a common moral vision and a framework of moral thinking, whereby we actually value people, we value the individual, the intrinsic dignity, the intrinsic worth of people as the true objects of the economy. And so that is really important today, because that's largely been forgotten, because our economic systems are amoral. So they're not immoral, they're just amoral. There's zero moral content. It's up to us to inject the moral petrol into the economic engine, if you like. So if you think of an engine that is amoral, you need the petrol to be pumped through it for it to work well. And moral thinking is what does that. Moral content is what does that. And the Christian message offers that moral content. It offers it in its simplest way, in acknowledging that all people are made in the image of God. So straight away, you have intrinsic value for people, you have intrinsic equality, where everyone is created equal. And from that, you can build things like property rights and human rights and democracy and other things whereby people are honored and respected and recognized. But without that moral petrol, then the system can become quite dangerous, and it can actually degenerate from an amoral system into an immoral force, where people are hurt, people are oppressed, people are subjugated, where there is gross inequality, where people are effectively damaged, or people succeed at the expense of others who are damaged. And we see a lot of that today. We see it all over the world. And the problem largely is because we have forgot that intrinsic dignity of all people, and we forgot it in a systemic way. And so it's really all the more important for the church and for followers of Jesus to be a prophetic voice and to speak out into that, and also to materially actually put our money where our mouth is. And actually help people and reach out and do what we can. And thankfully, through history, you see a lot of Christians doing this. The very concept of charity, the building of hospitals, the alleviation of suffering, the abolition of slavery, the civil rights fights and battles, the declarations of democracy, the liberations of people, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Again and again, you see either Christians, or at the very least, Judeo-Christian thinking at the heart of a lot of these things. And it comes because of that moral content and that moral substance that Christianity offers. Jürgen Habermas, the great atheist, philosopher and professor, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he so powerfully said that modern civilization owns so much of its idea of moral consciousness to the Jewish ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. I think that's a very powerful acknowledgement of what I've been talking about.
Amazing. And Jürgen Habermas wrote that amazing line in his book, Time of Transitions, if I'm right. I think that's the title of the Time of Transitions. Because, the reason why I asked that, sir, because I'm also into a little bit of self-study in economics as well. Like, I subscribe to a YouTube channel of Mike Maloney, and wherein he, I know him. I've heard of him as well, Mike Maloney. I mean, in his case, his defense is gold and silver are real money, but then the money that we're circulating right now is not the real money. So that's a very interesting thing. That that like the sense of the elites are becoming richer and the poor are getting poorer. So, but as what you said, sir, we all need morality in that system as well. Whether it's amoral or immoral, there still has to be the image of God, what you call image of God in that system as the foundation of economics. So, wow, that's a very amazing. I mean, amazing explanation there, sir. So we shall move now to. From there, we shall move now to the youth, the young generation.
Sure.
Because the young generation, the young people are the backbone of the society. And And like what you said earlier, post-truth era. We are in that generation right now, post-truth generation, and
Mm.
the generation that we call Generation Z are affected by this era, post-truth. So, Sir Max, what is your advice? How can the young generation adjust to this post-truth era? I mean, what are your insights on that question, sir?
Yeah, it's interesting because in so many ways, it's easy for us to think that we're in a unique cultural era at the moment. And funnily enough, I think most generations think that their generation is unique. But the reality is that we've been through all of this before. Post-truthism, postmodernism comes straight out of the Garden of Eden. You know, like when when the the devil says to Adam, or says to Adam and Eve, you know, did God really say that? That's postmodern reconstruction right there. That's deconstruction straight away. That's invoking, you know, this mythical idea that, you know, context can completely change substance or can completely change truth, or you can distort someone's understanding of something purely by subjectivizing it. Um, and we just see that all over again. I think, you know, I know Ravi used to quote Malcolm Muggeridge a lot, and so forgive me for doing so now, but I think it was Muggeridge who said that history is just the same thing happening over and over again to different people. And so this post-truth era is nothing new. We went through it recently in the postmodern era, you know, in the 60s and 70s, where they told us that there was no such thing as truth. And so the post-truth thinking is simply not so much that there's no such thing as truth, it's just that truth doesn't matter. Our feelings are more important than truth. So this is just the successor to postmodern thinking. It's not complex. It's not particularly impressive. It's equally as philosophically bankrupt as postmodernism was, but it is more dangerous because what it says is not that truth does not exist, but it says that whether truth exists or not doesn't matter. All that matters is your feelings. And that is very dangerous because if you don't even care whether truth exists, then you can pretty much justify anything if you feel good about it. And the problem with post-truth thinking is that it assumes that everyone wants what you want. Post-truth thinking wouldn't know how to deal with a Hitler or a Stalin or a Mao or a Pol Pot or a Mussolini or anyone like this. Post-truth thinking effectively builds synthetic moral systems around each individual based on their own preferences, and then just hopes that we don't bump into anyone else's moral principles. And so its biggest weapon is this idea of tolerance, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. The problem with tolerance is it's a very low bar. And it's also completely disengaged. It completely disengages people from one another. So it basically says to the 7 odd billion people in the world, you just go and invent 7 billion moral systems individually, and then we'll just tolerate each other. The problem is that if any of those 7 billion moral systems are inconsistent with the other, and you know that that's going to happen, all you need is 2 people for inconsistencies, then there's no way of surviving. And so, liberalism as we know it, modern liberalism, is anchored in a good place, that people are equal, that people are free, that people should be able to pursue their own versions of happiness. It's anchored in a good place, but one of the false conceptions of liberalism, and there are several liberalisms that we now live in, there's not just one liberalism, but one of the most damaging ones is just trying to build societies where people can do whatever they want without getting in the way of other people. That's a very weak way to build society when all you are going for is the cohesional functioning of society. Because there's all kinds of things that, at least theoretically, you could build into those systems as long as not enough people care about it, you could just allow it for it to happen, whether it's rape or child abuse or eugenics or whatever it might be, torture, war, discrimination, structural racism, gender discrimination. All of those things are potentially compatible with a post-truth culture. So the short answer to your question is, I hope this generation never adjusts to post-truth culture. I hope no one adjusts to post-truth culture, because post-truth culture is intellectually incoherent and existentially bankrupt, because it doesn't make any sense to think we can build artificial systems of morality and self-actualization and think that they won't bump into each other. So at some point we're going to have to engage. At some point we're going to have to open up to each other and have a discourse. We're going to have to disagree without being disagreeable. We're going to have to, build societies that are cohesive and functional with people that we don't know, that don't understand us, that don't like or agree with the views that we hold. And the post-truth culture just doesn't make room for that. So that's one point. And the second reason is that post-truth culture just doesn't satisfy existentially or experientially. There are needs of the human heart that simply can't be met by just saying to young people, just go and do whatever feels good. Well, what if cocaine feels good? What if, casual, unprotected, indiscriminate sex feels good? That may be the case in the short term. That might be fine as a 10-minute solution, or a 20-minute solution, or a 30-minute solution, or a 1-year solution. But in the long term, post-truth thinking doesn't work because it's anchored in feelings, and feelings go up and down, not just every 1 year or 10 years, but potentially every 5 or 10 minutes. We need something transcendent, something deeper and bigger in which to anchor our identity, through which to define our notions of pleasure, through which to understand our ideals of justice, and what's right and wrong morally, and what's fair, and to bring about the things that all humans need and want, things like redemption and reconciliation and inner peace, and that sense of self and meaning that we're all looking for. Those things need more than just feelings. If it was just about our feelings, and I think I've written this before, or said it in a talk maybe, if feelings were all it was about, C.S. Lewis said this, I would just need a bottle of scotch and a few friends if it was that easy. But I think we all know deep down, you don't have to go too deep to know that success in life, fulfillment in life, flourishing in life is about much more than feelings.
Amen. Wow. No, wow. I like what you said there, Sir Max, about discourse. That's why, folks, you viewers, please like and follow and share our page, because we focus on 3 words: facts, cross, discourse. So what we're doing right now here with Sir Max over here is we're having this discussion. And we're also discussing actually indirectly with you guys, with you viewers, who are finding meaning, who are finding answers to questions. And it simply tells us that we have to be vulnerable, we have to be humble. Like we don't have all the answers, but actually the only one who can give us the answer is the person of Jesus Christ. And it's amazing that in this post-truth era, it is incoherent. It doesn't bring complete satisfaction to humanity. That's why we need the person of Christ. And so we proceed now to the next question, sir. This now from there we shall now focus now on the role of the church. Focus now on the church as the institution, as a social institution. So same thing with the bring up the idea of post-truth. And we are now living, we all know that we are in the 21st century. Like, man, 21st century. I mean, wow. I mean, since Christ. It's a long time. And the church is still standing. So, Sir Max, my question here is, what do you think should the role of the church be? I mean, how should the church reach out? How can the church reach out to the young generation in this 21st century? Yeah, still related to the youth, but this time, what should be the responsibility of the church adjusting to this 21st century, sir?
Yeah, it's a really important question. Obviously, I think it's helpful, perhaps, before I answer the question, just to clarify the definition of the church, because I think a lot of the time we misunderstand what church means. We actually think that the church is an institution or a set of institutions, whereas if we're going to be biblical about it, the Bible never talks about the church as an institution, either cultural, social, political, or otherwise. The church is simply a collective noun for the followers of Jesus. So I think that's a helpful place to start. And of course, it's a healthy and an entirely biblical thing for followers of Jesus to come together in fellowship and in community in order to follow Jesus and love him and love each other and reach out to those around them, using their resources collectively. And, there's no better example in the world than CCF as a group of people who love Jesus that come together and do that. Wonderfully led, just an incredible impact, socially, culturally, just pouring out the love of Jesus on one another and importantly, on the community around them. And so we're at RZIM, we're blessed to walk with churches like CCF, which I think do demonstrate what I think the answer to your question is, because I think the church has 3 roles, and there are lots of other things that you could say about what churches are called to do. But I think on some level they all fall under one of these three categories. And I think if a church is doing anything too far different to these things, then we have to rethink what we're doing. The first is that churches are called to come alongside people and shepherd them and nurture them in their relationship with Jesus. Right? I think that's really important. To walk with people, to strengthen them, to deepen them, to mature them, and to lead them deeper in their relationship with the person of Jesus. The most important purpose for which all people were created, Christians and non-Christians, is to be in a loving and right relationship with God. And so the church's primary role is to foster that relationship. So that's the most important thing. The second thing, I think, is for the church to lead people who are not in relationship with Jesus into that relationship. So to give the non-believer a clear look at the person of Jesus Christ, a clear look at the cross of Jesus Christ. And, one way, one great example of how that can happen is exactly what you guys are doing, all right, with the Fellowship League. And that can happen through small groups, through youth ministry, through evangelistic meetings, through reaching out to people online, through digital transformation, through inviting skeptics and seekers and non-Christians to church events and to church services. There are countless ways through which groups of Christians can reach out to groups of non-Christians, to encourage people to foster relationships with their non-Christian friends and foster those kinds of friendships with their colleagues, to equip the people within the Christian church to actually be more confident and comfortable in talking about how the gospel relates to issues of culture, contemporary issues of the day, like you're doing right now, or to just equip people and train people in telling their story about how they came to know Jesus and what he's been doing in their lives. So number one focus of the church, lead people and shepherd people deeper in their walk with Jesus. Number two is to give non-Christians a clear look at the person of Jesus and reach out. And number three, to pour out the love of Jesus on the people of Jesus and the people outside of the church as well. So to pour out the love of Jesus on the community in which the church exists, whether that's in Manila or Metro Manila or all of the Philippines or across Asia or the Asia Pacific or across the world. Churches are called to be the arms and legs of Jesus in the world. In fact, the word Christian actually means little Christ. And so if the word Christian means little Christ, that points to the biblical reality that all followers of Jesus are called to be Jesus Christ in their world, in their family, in their workplace, in their community, wherever they work, whatever they're called to, which means that if the church is the collective noun for Christian, then the church is called to be the collective Jesus Christ to the world. So what Jesus is to the Christian, our Redeemer, our prophetic voice, our conviction, our conscience, our liberator, the church is called to be that, to have that exact same effect to the world. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was onto this. And there are other theologians like Kierkegaard that touched on this, where it's helpful to think analogically that what Jesus is to the Christian or what Jesus is to the individual, the church is to the society. So the church is called to be the collective Jesus of the society, which means speaking prophetically in love, but calling out society and actually talking to the world, whether it's in the political sphere, the cultural sphere, in economics, in finance, in business, in tech, in artificial intelligence, in sport, in art, in media, in music, in literature, whatever it might be, actually speaking into those spheres, using those as channels for the gospel of Jesus Christ, number one. And alongside that, equally importantly, actually reaching out literally with our arms and legs and money and resources, alleviating suffering, reaching out to the widow, reaching out to the homeless, reaching out to the oppressed, reaching out to the prisoner, reaching out to the disadvantaged, reaching out to those who have been abused, who are mentally ill, who are intellectually disabled, and so forth. So if we keep our focus on those three things as collective Christians, as churches, going deeper in Christ ourselves as a group, reaching out to people who don't know Jesus yet and making him clearer and giving people a clear look at him so as to lead them into that relationship with him. And while all of that is happening, speaking and pouring out the love of Jesus Christ into the communities in which we are. I think those three things are obviously very easy to say, but I think they're a helpful way of kind of encapsulating the ecclesiological calling of the church, if you like, which is basically just, a way of saying, that's what the church is for. It's for those three things.
Amen. Amen. And like what you said also there on the collective Christ, little Christ people. Wow, I like the term there, little Christ. I believe
Right.
C.S. Lewis used that as well. Like, I read that quote somewhere. But um, in my experience, sir, it's really a blessing to have church like CCF, right? I mean, Christ Commission Fellowship. They're really firm with when it comes to accountability. That's why we in CCF, what we do is after the main session, so you have this big group people coming in to listen to the preacher or the pastor. After that, we have breakouts. So there's this facilitators or leaders uh, doing the accountability process in each of these small groups, like sharing of life, sharing of experiences, sharing of ideas. And so I came from that was my upbringing as a Christian, and that helped me a lot understand the meaning of what love really is. Because in my experience, sir, growing up as a young Christian, I used to be so intellectually driven, sir. As in to the point that I used to be so into debates and arguments back in school, and also become so, like, want to move ahead of all the people just because you want to be smart and all. But then I realized that because of the love that the church shown to me, and of course I believe the family should also be included as well to equip the young generation. I was able to see that there has to be a balance of the two. It's not always about the mind, but it's also about the heart. So I learned something that we should not only think with our hearts, we should also think with we should also think with our minds, and vice versa. So that's what I learned so far, based on my experience as a young Christian. And we highly encourage you viewers, if you have no one to talk to, please be willing to talk with us, the Fellowship League, or go to our page Elevate Main, and we're willing to help you with your concerns. Please look for someone to talk to, because in this generation, it's really hard to adjust. I mean, especially young people. So yeah, that's our encouragement to you guys.
That's
So
great.
okay, so Sir Max, this is the second to the last question. Um,
Sure.
we should now focus on the gospel of Jesus Christ. So the last question here is, Sir, what is special about Jesus in this time? I mean, it's the 21st century. I mean, it's a long time since the time of Christ, since the time of 30 AD or 30
Yeah.
or 33
Yeah.
AD. I mean, where can we put Jesus here in this time right now? What is special about him in this time, sir? I mean, yeah, if you have anything to share.
Yeah, yeah. Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician and philosopher, he said that inside every person is a God-shaped hole. And I think that's a useful way of approaching this question, is that in the 21st century, we have built very sophisticated systems of satisfaction and distraction and pleasure and convenience, whether it's our digital infrastructure through which we stay connected, our smartphone technology, the speed of communication, how convenient it can be if you have the financial resources to live. Food just turns up, you just order a few touches of a screen and you can pretty much have anything you want. We fly around the world with impunity, or at least until recently we did. And so in that kind of world of decadence, or at least relative decadence, it can be easy to think that we have everything that we need. And in many ways we do, at least in a material and a functional sense. The problem with that is it ignores our existential needs. It ignores the deeper needs of humankind that are not Christian needs, they're just human needs. They're on every human heart. And these are things that haven't changed for thousands and thousands of years. Like, they're not 2020 things. They're not Gen Z or Alpha Gen or iGen or millennial things. These are needs that have been on every human heart ever since the very beginning. The need for belonging, the need for freedom from guilt, the need for freedom from shame, the need for hope, the need for fulfillment, the need for flourishing, the need for a sense of meaning, the need for a sense of purpose, the need for relationality, the need for acceptance through relationship. All of these things are much deeper existential and experiential needs, and no amount of iPhones or Zoom calls will satisfy those needs, right? It doesn't matter how much you marathon on Netflix, those needs just simply are not going to be fulfilled. The best that those things can do is distract us. There's some great writing by a guy called Neil Postman, great thinker. His best book on this, in my view, is called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And so we've built up these systems of amusement, if you like, that can be good, but they've become so central to our experiential attempts to fulfill ourselves that through them we are distracted from and we can ignore our deeper existential needs. And this is where the person of Jesus becomes so powerful, because he diagnoses this problem straight away. He says, if I'm right, and if this message is true, and if I am who I say that I am, then you would expect to see some things in the evidence out there. Not in the evidence, the abstract evidence, philosophically or anthropologically or archaeologically, though that evidence is there for the Christian message, but simply inside the human heart, the evidence base in every human heart. You would expect people to have a lot of good in them. You would also expect people to have the capacity for a lot of bad and evil in them. You would expect people to want acceptance. You would expect people to need some sense of relationship. You would expect that people would be yearning for a solution to success, an explanation for success, and some kind of a means to get through success. You would also expect people to hope for something beyond success. And you would expect there to be some kind of hope that actually exists that goes beyond success and suffering. Now, when we look at our world and we look at our hearts, that's exactly what we see. So the person of Jesus and the Christian message makes perfect sense of the condition of the human heart and the condition of the human soul. It does all of those things, and then incredibly, it meets all of those needs as well. The need for belonging, the need for acceptance, the need for freedom, the need for liberation, the need for peace, the need for hope beyond suffering, the need for comfort and strength to get through suffering. It actually brings all of these things together in a coherent whole that's intellectually consistent within itself, and that's also experientially and practically relevant and applicable in life, in this life and in the next life as well. So why Jesus is so relevant and so important today, as he has always been. So again, these answers are not new, because the human heart has just simply not changed, is that he has the explanatory power to make sense of the world around us, and more importantly, the heart within us, and he has the transformative power to come alongside us and provide us with what we need in the context of fulfillment and flourishing that we are all looking for. So he explains and diagnoses the needs of the human heart, and then he fulfills and provides for the needs of the human heart. I think that's why he is as relevant now as he has ever been, because he has everything that you and I need, that you and I have always been looking for, and that everyone out there has been looking for. And it doesn't really matter what else we try, it always comes back to the person of Jesus. That's the only place where we can get it. Everything else is just a counterfeit or a synthetic attempt to do what he actually did on the cross all those years ago.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it's, Jesus Christ is the only way. He's the only truth and the only life for every human being. I mean, those are all of those words have been condensed to that person of Jesus. I see that. Oh, it's amazing. For a little bit of clarification of words there for you viewers, when we say experiential, we mean by experiences. So that's what you meant when you say experiential. And when you say coherent, we focus on all things are connecting together. So like it's logical. It's like we are in here. We are making sense. We are relevant. So that's what it means. Like it's meaningful. So only in Jesus there's coherence, meaning there's relevance in Jesus, because he answers all of our sufferings. He is always there for us. He leads us out of suffering. Okay, sir. We respect your time. We know that you're a busy man. You're really busy, and I mean for the Lord. I mean by God's grace, you've been around. In a few minutes, you'll be out to do something important. So this is our last question, sir. So, sir, in your own words, brother, what are your closing remarks for our viewers, sir, and for the church out there who are seeking?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me, Carl. It's always nice to see you and to catch up briefly. I look forward to catching up in person over a meal as soon as the Lord wills it. And so thanks for the opportunity to be on with you and to share with some of your team and others who might be able to tune into this. I think just two basic messages from me in closing, and they're very, very simple, and I kind of touched on them throughout the time we've spent together. But for those of you who are walking with Jesus and you're tuning into this, I just really want to encourage you to go deeper in your walk with him, and to be encouraged and get yourself equipped. And this is a great channel and medium through which to do that. Get yourself equipped to answer these sorts of questions and to engage with the people in your families, in your friendship groups, in your universities, in your workplaces, in your schools. Get equipped to engage with them, to be able to share the reason for the hope that you have. The entire growth of the kingdom of God is anchored on people like you sharing what Jesus has done in your life and coming alongside people lovingly, graciously, and relationally, pouring out the love of Jesus and giving people a clear look at him. So I just really want to encourage you in that. For those of you who might have drifted away from God, who might have called yourself a Christian once and now you're not so sure, or you've never called yourself a Christian, or you hate the idea of God and you hate Christians, and somehow you just found yourself watching this last hour, I just really want to encourage you that God loves you. He knows you by name. He wants what's best for you. And I encourage you to investigate. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Carl's word for it. Continue to ask your questions. If this is true, it can stand up to questioning. In fact, the truth can stand up to questioning. It's the only thing that can stand up to questioning. So I encourage you to keep questioning. And we deeply believe from the bottom of our hearts that if you follow the evidence to where it leads and question honestly, in good faith, with an open heart and an open mind, it will lead you to the person of Jesus. And you will realize, I hope sooner rather than later, that it hasn't actually been you who's been pursuing him, but it's been him that's been pursuing you. So I encourage you to open the Bible and read one of the biographies of Jesus. I encourage you to read the Gospel of John if you don't know which one to choose. Find a Christian, ask them questions. They might not know all the answers, but if they are walking with Jesus, they will help you find the answers you're looking for. And they will connect you with resources and with people who can give you those answers. And so I just want to encourage you never to stop, because your life is too important. Your future is too important. We love you too much. That's why we're doing things like this. That's why Carl is giving of his time. That's why we at RZIM do what we do. That's why CCF does what it does. Because we don't just love Jesus, we love you. And we want you to have everything that God has for you. A life that is more incredible than you could ever imagine. So thank you all for tuning in. And I wish you all well. I wish you God's blessings. And Carl, I wish you and your team and in this initiative in the Fellowship League all the best in great things and success for the future. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely, sir. We will pray for you, for your family, for your ministry, and for what you have worked a lot. I mean, you worked so hard in the ministry, and you're still pursuing it. And we really admire your zeal for the Lord and reaching out to people who are in need, who are seeking answers for not only truth but also love. We thank you very much, brother, for not only being our mentor here and also a great apologist, but you are also our brother here in Christ. And we thank you very much for being part of our wonderful special question and answer session. So for you viewers, please like, follow, and share our Facebook page, the Fellowship League. Again, Pax, Cross, and Discourse. We will be posting this and we'll be tagging the Sir Max here in this recorded video. And we hope to see you again in our next guest, and which will be led maybe by Aaron or by other colleague Alec, or maybe by me. No, but you will never know. So we will announce it anytime. Depends on how the Lord will give us time. But Sir Max, to God be all the glory, bro. Soli Deo Gloria, and God bless you, sir, on your ministry. God bless
Thanks,
you guys.
Carl.
And
God bless.
God bless, and adios. It's a great session. See you next time. Stay tuned.